Why would you call in for delivery when you could just make it yourself? That's what this show is all about. Today, we're making grandma-style pizza from your kitchen with ingredients that you probably already have lying around in your house. Andiamo. Let's get started. Just like your grandmother had with you, I'm sure there was a ton of patience. This recipe calls for just that, as it's going to take us 2 days to complete this pizza. So our first step is to take 1 1/4 cup or 300 milliliters of warm water, and we want to make sure that it's around 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius to ensure that we activate the yeast. Now speaking of yeast, we're going to take half a teaspoon or 3 grams of active dry yeast, along with 2 teaspoons or 10 grams of sugar, and we're going to give it a little whisk to make sure that everybody really just gets to know each other. In the meantime, after that's done, you're going to let it sit for about 8 to 10 minutes to ensure the yeast blooms. Now you'll know it's ready and that the yeast is bloomed when there's bubbles and there's a little bit of a frothiness to the top of this mixture. When it's done, you'll be putting that into your dry mixture later on. Next step is we take 4 cups or 500 grams of 00 flour and add 2 teaspoons or 10 grams of kosher salt, and we give it a little whisk to again make sure that everybody gets to know each other. Now it's important to know while we're mixing here why I'm using 00 flour. It has high gluten, so it's really going to promote elasticity when we're doing our final stretch in the dough. If you don't have 00, you can use any kind of bread flour to get that same kind of elasticity. Now the next steps are pretty easy. We're going to take our bloomed yeast mixture and put that right into the mixing bowl along with both of our dry ingredients, the flour and salt, right on top of that, which brings me to my favorite part, of course, adding Greek extra virgin olive oil to everything. We take 4 tablespoons or 50 milliliters of Greek extra virgin olive oil and add that to the mixture. Once that's all complete, we're going to add our mixing bowl to the actual mixer and attach our dough hook, in which this time, unlike in other videos, I actually didn't mess it up. Hooray for me. Now once you've given yourself a nice pat on the back for learning how to put on the mixer, put it on low speed and let it do its thing for 8 to 10 minutes until the dough becomes nice and elastic just like this. Now after being overly cocky from before, remember that you really don't know how to use a mixer and struggle with your machine to, get the dough out of there. But hey, you live and you learn. Either way, take the dough hook out, get the dough off, and we're going to remove all of that dough from the mixing bowl and put it onto our work surface. Once we have it on our work surface, we're going to begin to, pulling it into itself and just start shaping it into a nice little ball, just like this, and we get ready for our next step. And that next step, of course, involves even more olive oil. We're going to take the olive oil, put it into a bowl, rub it around, so that way we can make sure the dough doesn't stick to the sides as it rises. Give the dough a little twirl and flip it onto the other side and twirl it some more, so this way we can get it ready for its final rise. We are going to put some plastic wrap on the top, and if you're any good at it like I am here, clearly you'll get it on nice and quickly. And we're going to again put it into a warm environment for 2.5 hours to make sure that this thing rises. Now after you've sat around for about 2.5 hours wondering how it's going to turn out, stop wondering. It's going to look like this, where we'll take the plastic wrap off and we'll see that it's doubled and in some cases even tripled in size. Either way, you're going to have a beautiful, airy dough as soon as it's done. Now, if by this point you haven't gotten the theme of this recipe, I'll just tell you, we use a ton of olive oil in it. We're going to take even more olive oil, about 2 tablespoons or so, and we're going to rub it across the entire pan to make sure that every nook and cranny of this guy is covered in olive oil. From that point, we take our dough out of the bowl, we're going to just turn it out right onto there, and we're going to begin to stretch it out by pressing it lightly and just pushing it to the sides, so that way the dough reaches the edges of the pan. Again, just going to press lightly with our hands, slightly with our fingers and our palms, and push it out until it gets really to the side of the pan. Now, the technique here is pretty simple. Again, we're just going to press it out with our fingers, a little bit with our palms, and really just push it out to the edge of the pan. And it's not anything really crazy. Sometimes if you want to give it a little bit of a stretch, it works. Sometimes if you don't, it's okay too. But again, the dough will eventually stretch out to the sides. It is something that takes a little bit of patience, but in the end, it's really worth it. If you do find that it doesn't stretch to the end, just, take a little bit of a rest and come back to it in about 5 minutes, and it will most likely just really get to the point where you want it to be. Now, once we've finished stretching the dough, we're going to take a little bit more plastic wrap and we're going to cover it. After we cover it, you put it into the refrigerator and we're going to let it rest overnight, minimum of 8 hours. Really, guys, if you let it rest for 8 hours, it's going to get some beautiful flavors that are going to develop, and you're really going to enjoy the taste later. And now we've made it to the sauce. So the first step to the sauce is we take fresh basil, and from that we're going to take the leaves right off, and we're going to stack the basil leaves one by one on top of each other, and then roll them up to be able to really slice these nice and thinly. It's a really nice, easy trick to do, and it gets the basil slices nice and thin, where we're going to add it to the sauce a little bit later. So our next step is we're going to take a medium saucepan over low heat and add 3 tablespoons or 30 milliliters of extra virgin Greek olive oil into the pan. After that's nice and warm, we're going to add 3 garlic cloves, which are minced, in there, and let it kind of get to a little bit of a brown color before you add in your chopped basil that we did previously into the mixture, and stir it around until it gets a nice golden color and it gets just really nice and infused, about 2 minutes after that. Now, if you have special powers or a can opener, you're going to open a 28-ounce can of San Marzano tomatoes, to which we're going to add back into our saucepan where the garlic and basil have now infused with each other, and we're going to crush it with what's known to European grandmothers as a weapon, but to you more commonly as a wooden spoon. Crush the tomatoes to your desired texture, so that way it adds a nice chunkiness to our sauce that we add onto the pizza in the end. Now, once the tomatoes are crushed, we're going to add 2 teaspoons or 10 grams of kosher salt, 2 teaspoons or 10 grams of ground black pepper, and also add, totally optional if you want, red pepper flakes to the sauce, and we're going to stir it together. After you've stirred it together, we're going to place the lid onto the saucepan and allow the sauce to simmer for about 5 to 8 minutes. Once the 5 to 8 minute period is passed, again, take the lid off and let the sauce simmer down until it's reduced down to your desired thickness. Really, you can't mess this up, just get it to the point where you really want it to be. Now, for this pizza, I decided, because it's so large, to use some spicy pepperoni on half of the pizza. Now, you can slice this with a knife, but I chose to slice this pepperoni with a mandolin. It's a little bit easier, and it gets the slices to be uniformly thin. I want it to have like that thinness, so it can, when you put it under the heat, it begins to kind of just like a pepperoni cup when it's in the oven. It's really just amazing. Now, the key to any great pizza is the mozzarella. I chose to use 1 pound or 450 grams of fresh mozzarella cheese. What we're going to do is we take the mozzarella cheese along with our cheese grater and just grate the crap out of it right into the bowl until you're all finished. Once it's complete, you're going to put it back into the fridge until we're ready to put it on top of our pizza. Now we're almost at the finale. So we take our dough that's been outside of the fridge for at least an hour and begin to stretch it to the sides because it might have condensed overnight. Give it a little pat, and what you're going to see is there's air bubbles that are going to form. Don't worry, those are okay. What we're going to do is we take a fork and we poke out those air bubbles so that way it deflates and our pizza doesn't have a ton of like air pockets after it's done coming out of the oven. Now, traditionally, what you would do on a pizza is you add the sauce on the bottom. Not with grandma style pizza. What we're going to do is we take all of our freshly grated mozzarella and we're going to evenly distribute it across the entire pizza. Now, after we put our mozzarella on, we roll up our sleeves to make sure we don't get any of the beautiful sauce that we've made just earlier onto ourselves as we put it onto our pizza. Why would you waste the sauce? The stuff is delicious. You gotta have every last bit of it. But I digress. Put the sauce on the rest of the pizza, and we prepare ourselves to put on the toppings next, in which I chose to use pepperoni on half of this guy. You can use it across the whole thing, but sometimes you go for things that are just a little bit different. Today, I wanted to do pepperoni on half, so the other half we can enjoy it as a margarita. Last step is we take a little bit of oregano and we sprinkle it over the entire pie to give it a little bit of extra flavor while it's cooking. After that's completed, we're going to put it into the oven at 550 degrees Fahrenheit or 285 degrees Celsius until it's golden brown. Now, it could take a little bit longer, but that really depends on the heat of your oven. So, just give it a little bit of a check every now and then, and you'll be able to tell when it's done. Now, before we cut into this pan of our collective childhood, we're going to take some of our chopped basil that we had from before and sprinkle it over the margarita side, and then we're going to give a little bit of a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil just to top it off. Before you slice it up, be sure that you wait for about 5 minutes so all the oils reset from the cheese and the pepperoni and the oil that you just threw on top, and you're ready to go. Now I have one last question for you. Who's ready to get face deep in some pizza? If you like what you saw in this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. Also, if you want the full recipe in a written format, go to my website, evankaras.com, for the whole thing. See you guys next week.